Welcome to the Practice Podcast, a show created by lawyers to help lawyers in life and business without all the complicated lawyer language. Let's welcome Bast Amron founders and your hosts, Jeff Bast and Brett Amron.
Welcome to a special edition of the Practice Podcast. This episode is a recording from Bast Amron's 7th Annual Business Advantage Forum, which took place on January 30th, 2025. The forum is a learning and networking event we host and underwrite each year with all proceeds donated to a charitable organization. Our theme this year was intelligence, the role of emotional intelligence and artificial intelligence in the modern workplace. And it sparked insightful discussions on how these two forms of intelligence are shaping the way we lead, collaborate, work, and innovate. Our expert panels explored the intersection of emotional and artificial intelligence in today's workplace. And this particular panel is called Innovation Through Emotional Intelligence. The panel highlights how emotional intelligence fuels collaboration, creativity, and innovation within organizations. And on this particular panel, industry leaders shared insights on building emotionally intelligent teams that drive continuous success. We hope that you enjoy this recording. And if you want to find more recordings from prior years, here you can do that here on the podcast or on our website at bastamron.com/news.
What's our first panel called? Our first panel is called Innovation Through Intelligence. And I'm really excited to introduce our moderator, who has been with our firm for a little more than 5 years now. She doesn't look mean, but she's ferocious. So she has been kicking ass and taking names for 5 years at Bast Amron. I'm really excited to have Alejandra Iglesia as our moderator. Alejandra, please come on up and bring up the first set of panelists.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the forum. I'm super excited to have you guys at the event, and in particular, I'm super excited to moderate this panel. Emotional intelligence is an interest of mine personally. It's something I think about regularly, and I'm lucky to have these three individuals next to me to talk about it today. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce each of our amazing panelists, starting with Darline. Darline is the VP of Finance and Retail at the Miami Dolphins. She enters her 4th season with the Dolphins and 3rd as VP of Finance and Retail. In this capacity, she manages the finance, accounting, payroll, account payables, and merchandise operations for the team. Do we have any Dolphins fans at the forum? Yeah. Prior to joining the Dolphins, Darline served for 4 years as the Director of Finance and Controller at the Los Angeles Rams. She also worked at Ernst & Young as a member of the commercial real estate practice. Darline completed her MBA at UCLA Anderson School of Management and received her Master of Accountancy from the University of South California, where she also graduated cum laude with a degree in business. She's a member of the American Institute of CPAs and is also an active CPA. Darline, her husband Devin, and their son reside in Coral Gables. Darline, thanks so much for joining us. To my left here, we have Mr. Jeffrey Weissman, Senior Vice President, Chief Counsel of World Fuel Services. Mr. Weissman is responsible for legal oversight of all the company's commercial and physical operations worldwide, including transactional, commercial, strategic, litigation, risk management, environmental, safety, technology, regulatory, compliance, and governance. Anything else? That's it?
That's my LinkedIn profile. Okay. 100%.
Prior to World Fuel, Jeffrey served as General Counsel of Global Fleet Management Solutions at Ryder System Inc., responsible for legal oversight, strategy, and support for Ryder's $5 billion vehicle leasing, rental, and maintenance business. Prior to that role, he served as an associate at Holland & Knight. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we have Mr. Porpoise Evans here in the middle. He is the office managing shareholder at Littler Mendelson and a good friend of the firm's. Porpoise advises on public and private companies for areas of employment law matters, including wage and hour compliance, discrimination claims, breach of contract, leave, and disability accommodation, and workplace safety. He regularly defends employers in federal and state courts, as well as before the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Florida Commission on Human Relations. He also conducts in-market risk assessments for multinational companies, preparing policies and procedures, and training employees on compliance with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Porpoise also has deep experience representing financial industry regulatory authority, member firms in arbitrations. Welcome, Porpoise. All right, right, guys, so we're just going to get right into it. I have some questions that I hope will inspire some dialogue, and I hope it's interesting to all of you, and I hope it's interesting to all of you as well. We'll start with my first question. How does emotional self-awareness impact an individual's ability to think creatively and to approach problems from new angles? Jeff, I want to start with you.
First, I want to say thank you for having me. When Jeff asked me to speak on emotional intelligence and artificial intelligence, I told him quite squarely that I was an expert of neither. I declined. I've known Jeff's wife, Jalais, since she's about 4 years old, and I'm probably about 7. Jalais' dad, Mike, was my Little League coach, and our families have been friends since. Very happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I don't really remember the question, but you'll probably answer a different question. When I say that I'm not an expert on emotional intelligence, first, as it relates to the topic, I guess my current view would be that emotional intelligence is essential to effectiveness in any area. We can talk about how it relates to AI or collaboration or innovation, but I think the reality is that you're just picking a topic to apply EI to, and that it's essential to everything. I worked with Jeff at Holland & Knight 30 years ago, which is how we know each other. And I left the practice. 1, I didn't really like being a litigator, but 2, I didn't like the idea of doing business development. I'm an introvert by nature. I didn't want to do it. I didn't realize that I was going to have to do it wherever I went. It was just a different type of business development. It took me a really, really long time to realize that just doing hard work or just doing a good job wasn't going to get me where I wanted to or needed to go. And I will say that now I am a fierce defender of the importance of emotional intelligence. I can't say that I'm good at it, but I practice it every day. And as it relates to my team, which has 40 people working remotely, we have 10 in London, 8 in South Africa, 3 in Singapore, employees in Brazil, several in different places within the United States. So most of my team, I have a team of 40, I have maybe 20% in Miami, and now we're largely remote. The most important part of my job that I see is to create an environment where the individuals on the team can achieve what they need to achieve. If I looked at my job and said, I need to oversee every single piece of work that gets done by the company, it's impossible. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to cultivate an environment where people feel engaged with the things that we're working on, understand what their goals are, what we're required of them, and then fiercely protect the working environment they have and try to remove obstacles. But I look at EI as the most important part of my job, and that if I'm not doing a good job of that, I'm probably falling down. Sorry, I didn't answer the question.
I think it's fine, and you bring up an interesting point that is another topic I wanted to raise today, so thank you. You mentioned that only 20% of your team is local and the rest of your team works remotely from all over the world. So how do you incorporate EI, or how does EI become a tool to keep your team, your remote team, engaged and productive really overseas or even domestically in other states?
So I've been at my job in my company for 15 years now. I've had 3 jobs in my career. I've worked for 3 companies. I like to go where I am and stay there and achieve things. I don't like the idea of looking for work, or I like to try to make the place I am better. When I took over the role, we did what some of you guys do. They're called NPS surveys. Corporate America does them all the time. It's called Net Promoter Score. So we did Net Promoter Score survey with my team. And one of the things that stood out is, as a group, weren't super happy. And the thing that they were most concerned about was communication. So we were a group that met together under my former boss, maybe even by Zoom, twice a year, the whole group. So we set up a cadence. We now meet the entire team every 2 weeks for an hour by Zoom. And I try to get at what people's concerns with communication. Number 1 was transparency. And I think the other was a feeling of community. So when I put that hour together, sometimes I have people from the company come in and speak to us. Sometimes I have people who are experts on other things come in and speak. But more often than not, I don't honestly care what the agenda is. This week, the first meeting of the year, the agenda was, what did you do on your winter break? And if we spent the entire hour talking about what people did on winter break, ecstatic. At one point, the team didn't know each other that well. So I asked everyone, they were going to present something, but before they presented something, they had to tell the team something about themselves that no one else would know. That's fully built on itself until finally one guy did like a 35-minute PowerPoint on himself. And when he was done, I was like, amazing, you got the assignment. That was it. You did it. Because the more that we understand, the more that we know about each other, I think that the way that we spend that time and our focus on that, I think, is emblematic about how I value AI. I literally don't care if all we did was crosstalk for an hour and enjoyed each other, ecstatic. It's really hard to build culture over a group of 40 people. It's too expensive. We're going to bring people in probably together every 2 years as a group. It's really hard to get people together. It's not a lot of business travel these days. So I see that as super valuable.
Awesome. Thinking a little bit about corporate America, and I have never heard of the
NPS, Net Promoter Score.
I've never done that. I hope we have a good NPS at Bast Amron. Something I'm thinking about too is, as you're having these conversations with your company and your staff and your teammates, we tend to get mixed messages, I think, in corporate America or just in a professional environment about leaving your emotions at the door, right? I mean, there's some sense that we're expected to leave our emotions at the door in order to conduct our jobs and sort of professionally perform. How do you balance connecting with your team and sort of having that rapport that you discussed, and also maybe not allowing emotions to be a central part of our jobs, or should they be? Darline, do you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think like anything, there's a time and place. Oh, before I start, thanks for having me. I'm not a lawyer. You have to all figure that out really quickly. So thanks for letting me speak here. The emotions, there's a time and place for everything, obviously. Like if I started crying up here, you guys would be like, whoa, what's happening? But with my team, I'm very vulnerable with them on a one-on-one basis. Like when we have our one-on-ones, I open and am vulnerable with them because I want them to be vulnerable with me. I had somebody on my team recently, one of their best friends passed away. She came in, she told me about it, she's very vulnerable, and I was able to be there for her and like give her the space and time she needs to heal from that. But I know by doing that, one, I care about her as a person and I want to make sure that she's good. But when she recovers from that, she's going to come back harder and better because she knows she has that support at work. And I think that's so essential. By sharing some of my own experiences with her, and I'm like, I know it's hard time, it lets her open up. It tells her like, this is a safe space. Obviously, we're not going to do that in front of a ton of other people. So like time and place obviously is important. But I do think like that vulnerability and not just checking your emotions at the door, it is important because if people don't know you as a person, as Jeff said, you're just a number. You're just someone just doing work. And we all want to be seen as human. So I do think that's a big difference and maybe change from previous generations.
I agree. Porpoise, do you want to add to that?
I guess I have to thank you too. And Brett, right? It's not just the Jeff show, but I'm really thankful to learn you've been practicing 32 years, so that must make you 10 years older than me. So I've only been practicing 22 years, so that made me feel good about myself.
I've been practicing for 6, so I feel the best.
But thank you to the firm for always putting on a good forum. I've been coming here for years and always walk away with at least a couple nuggets, pearls, whatever you want to call them. So I really appreciate it. And not to mention the good causes that we support here. So what were we talking about? Vulnerability?
Leaving our emotions.
Oh, leaving our emotions at the door. Well, I'm an attorney. And you talked about my day job. My other day job isn't just representing clients, but it's managing people. And in both of those situations, it is, I think, critical to be true to yourself. And that's kind of what I heard from both of you to start. I think that the old maxim about putting the face mask, the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on your kids is true in a lot of different ways. I think it's just a great metaphor. If you're not true to yourself, you're not going to be authentic. And we are taught, or at least the message that we get as attorneys, especially as litigators, especially is you're going to be a cold-blooded killer. You're a hired gun. We don't care what you think. Just get the job done and win the case. And I have never been as effective in that mindset as where I'm able to let my true self and my emotions get involved. I was in a matter recently where I'm defending a client against some horrific allegations brought by a young woman, and I was able to tell a story about something that happened in my life that allowed me to connect with the other side in a way that if I had just looked at this as an opportunity to beat her up and tell her how we were going to win the case, we might as well have gone home from the mediation 5 minutes in. So to me, being in touch with who you are and the touchy-feely side of yourself, I don't know if that's left or right brain, but I think it makes me a much more effective attorney. Maybe if I still was in the securities litigation world, it would be different, but working in the labor and employment space, if I can't make a personal connection with the other side, with the judge, with the people I'm managing, I can't be effective.
So many thoughts on that. And I think something that comes to mind is Earlier, Jeff, when you introduced the topic, you talked about the definition of emotional intelligence, and you talked about how it's your ability to manage your own emotions, but also the emotions of the people around you, including your team, your neighbors. And inevitably, unfortunately, I think over time, or just as teams start to get closer, sometimes we have energy vampires, right? Emotional vampires on our teams. We have people that are negative or that drain the energy in a room, or maybe suck the productivity out of the more positive and more productive people in the room. And that's a tough situation. How do you as a leader, and everybody here on the stage is a leader and in this room, how do you as a leader sort of address that or maybe neutralize that energy without alienating the rest of your team? Jeff.
I had never heard the term emotional vampire before, but I think it's a good one. I looked it up and it had all kinds of, I think it fit the definition of like narcissists or those kinds of concerns. But I'll tell you that emotional vampires aren't going to stay around my team very long. I'm more worried about like the emotional mosquitoes, the people who pick you to death and, no, it's another bloodsucker. It's just a tiny one. I look at our team environment as like an electrical circuit. If you have a circuit and there's any conductor in the circuit that's not functioning, you end up with an open circuit and electricity doesn't flow. And I feel very strongly that if you have people who don't share sort of the team's goals, the team's energy, who aren't the right fit for you from a cultural standpoint, that it takes so much to build the environment and the culture you're looking for with your team. It's a daily investment in building that culture. It's literally like engagement by engagement, because it's corporate America. No one really trusts you, and they're constantly looking for any reason not to trust you. So I guard my integrity and my credibility fiercely. And to the extent that we have people on the team that are not, I'd be much more willing to work with someone who I thought that their performance, their substantive performance needed work. I'd be much more willing to sort of work with those people over time than I would to work with people who I didn't think were good team members, just because it's so easy to erode the culture that you're building. It's a conversation by conversation. Best practice for me, I'm really not great at it. And I think my wife and my kids would say I'm not an active listener. I often can repeat back what they said, but I'm not sure I really know. So I make notes during the calls about, so I'll ask people, because I don't want to ask someone that I've talked to 15 times, hey, how are your kids, generically? So try to keep a list of the names of people's kids. What are their activities? If I have a call with someone, and I try to talk to everyone on my team one-on-one at least once a quarter, make notes on what it was that they were up to. So that when you go back to it, it's like, and by the way, I don't feel like I'm acting, because I'm not. I do care, but I probably wouldn't have remembered. So keep notes, try to use people's kids' names. Have calls with people that have nothing to do with their work unless they want to talk about work. If they want to talk about work, then happy to talk about it. But yeah, so emotional vampires, certainly no place for those. And then to the extent there are emotional vampires in the company, I can't believe I've adopted the term. We had a tax guy in our company that was literally, so passive aggressive by email, like an art form of passive aggressive. And his own boss didn't like to deal with him, so there would be tax issues that came up. The CFO would call me and say, hey, can you look into this? So-and-so isn't, I don't really want to talk to them about it. And so I would say, well, I'll set a meeting for the three of us. And he'd be like, well, no, just two of us. And the guy would have the file, so I'd have to send him an email and say, hey, can I have the so-and-so file? He asked me to look at it. And he would write back, I didn't realize that you were in charge of global tax now. I'll send over all the files. And I was like, what? So I would walk down to his office and say, hey, Pete, come on, really? And then once you got in front of him, it would be fine. So in terms of that, try to help people with those barriers. Try to make sure that they feel like you're struggling to deal with that person isn't your own problem, it's the company's problem. And then maybe try to help them with skills to be able to manage it themselves while you gently kind of try to remove the barrier in the background. But those things are much harder now because that person that's passive aggressive on email, I don't get to walk down to their office anymore.
Right.
Some people I can, but other people I got to call on Zoom or send Teams message. By the way, that guy I'm sure would have been a great neighbor, hilarious neighbor. Wasn't great though in the office. By the way, it's not a made-up story. That is absolutely 100% true. So I think that's the two sides of emotional vampires. None on my team, just not allowed. And I've moved some people on that weren't with the team culture, and then with others try to help my team learn how to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough, especially with the uptick in remote work, and especially as lawyers. I mean, there's so many lawyers with keyboard courage. I mean, there's so many people that have the courage to say something on a keyboard, but they can't say it to you in person. So I agree that in-person walk to the office, I mean, usually that disarms people. But I guess it leads me to think about my next question, which is, how responsible are you as a leader to manage the individual emotions on your team? I mean, obviously, it's my responsibility as a team member to manage my own emotions. And I'm a litigator too, so I've got a lot of emotions. And I express them a lot. And I wonder, how much is my team leader's responsibility? How much is it their responsibility to manage me? And how do you figure that out? I mean, everybody on the team is different. You have more quiet people, you have louder people, internalized rage people, you have externalized rage people. So I guess I'm just wondering, how responsible do you feel as a leader to sort of manage those emotions? Porpoise, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you think?
I feel personally responsible for all of it. Everything is my
100%.
problem. 100%. And all due respect, I've heard there's no place they're not allowed. I've interviewed for a lot of jobs in Miami, a lot of law firms over the 22 years. And I can't think of a single firm that has not told me they have a no asshole rule. Nobody has any, right? Until you get there.
Right.
And nobody is. Sorry if I offend anybody, but because everybody interviews really well, right? And then my take on it is, you're my problem once you're hired. I preach to my clients, hire slow, fire fast. But I don't really take that medicine, because if you've passed the rigorous test of getting into the firm, I feel like it's my responsibility to try to make you successful. So I do take that as, I guess, a personal challenge. And the mosquitoes and vampires, if they slip in, which they occasionally do, I try my best to defang them, so to speak. Pardon that pun. But I embrace them, and I want to let them know that we're a big tent, and we might be all over the place, I think circularly, not linearly, but we have a culture, and the culture is important. And I'm blown away by the culture of my firm because of its collaborative nature. And I have a very frank conversation that we do things a certain way, and the sharp elbows aren't welcome, but you are. And I know there's more to you than that. Maybe it's about breaking down barriers and getting to know them as a neighbor, and hopefully somebody that is in the office that we can break down those barriers in the same way. But then I want to bring in other members of my team, because I don't think it should just be the two of us. I want to make sure that, and if it's in a meeting, it's one thing, but if it's somebody who we're getting complaints about, who I have to address a passive-aggressive tendency, whatever, I want them to know that we are a team. My managing director, she's a cyclist, and she talks about the Peloton all the time and the working together. No matter who your number one person is, you're not going to do it. She is not going to do it alone. It takes the whole team. Takes a village. And I believe that that's been an effective approach to me for that emotional vampire, is showing them why we work together, why we're successful, and that we're all there to support that person. They're not going to be ostracized as long as they're willing to be a part of our culture.
I think, and Darline, you touched on this expressly, you talked about empathy and having empathy for your team member who had a best friend pass away. I think that's the sort of expressed and implied piece that's coming up in this conversation. It's that factor, that empathy factor, and perhaps disarming these emotional vampires or mosquitoes or whatever blood-sucking creature they are.
Chupacabra.
A chupacabra. Perhaps the key to that is just a little compassion and just a little empathy, your ability to put yourself in that person's shoes. So how does empathy specifically lead to more innovation, more creativity, and perhaps more successful outcomes on a team?
Yeah, I think part of that empathy, and as we talked about the energy vampires, mosquitoes, whatever, bloodsuckers of all sorts, it's a lot of times I think a lot of people that I found that it's because they're frustrated with something. And so that empathy comes into place to try to understand why. Why are you kind of so frustrated that you become this energy vampire? Maybe you're like a negative Nancy all of a sudden. And you weren't always, but a lot of times that's built from frustration. Either they don't like what they're doing at work, they don't feel like they're being respected, they don't feel like they're being challenged. And so a lot of times for me, it's sitting down with people and understanding and empathizing, be like, what's happening here? Because most people don't start off that way. And to your point, when you hire people, most of the time they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when they come in first day, and they're so excited to do everything. And then over time, they kind of become negative. You start seeing that kind of slide. But for me, a lot of times as a manager, that's my personal responsibility to catch it before you get to that really deep level, to be like, hey, what's happening here? Like, you used to be so positive, you used to be a lot of times like contributing to a much higher level. And I think what I found most of the time is a frustration of something. Whether that's, maybe somebody got promoted above them. It's like, okay, like what can you do to make sure that you're in a good position to be promoted? It's not that comparison game, or you're not getting the growth that you want. How can I help you do that? How can I help you be successful here? Because if you keep sliding into that, to your point, it does really hurt your culture. And like, you can't have that either as a leader, because it spreads. And you don't want everyone to be negative. And so I think when you lead with empathy and you try to address the issues before they fester and become really difficult, you tend to have a much more successful outcome.
To build on that too, when you're having the conversations and the active listening, I have learned that active listening requires you to understand the facts that the person is telling you, then dig into the emotions that are driving why they're telling you, and then push that a little further to figure out what's really important to them. Because usually it's something, like you're saying, something completely definably separate from the way they're behaving. So if you can get to the nugget of what's really driving them, what's important, whether it's the raise, whether it's the respect, and just beyond the facts that they're shooting at you, but spend the time with them, you can diffuse the negative behavior.
Thinking through the different ways that just people in general and also team members might be reacting or experiencing frustration, something that comes to mind for me is, gosh, we're all so different. We all have so many different personalities, and showing up authentically looks very different for people, and that range is wide and vast and broad. I can think of a million synonyms. What are some tools as a leader to manage the different personalities or the wide range of personalities on your team? You're busy, right? I mean, you want a one size fits all a little bit because you need some structure and you need some organization as a leader, but not everybody's one size, right? So how do you address that, and how do you deal with that variety? Jeff?
I was thinking about what Porpoise and Darline said, and it's hard. It's hard. Where I'm sitting, I'm expecting people to be professionals. The goals, the values that we lay out for the team, they're clear. We do a lot of seeking feedback. By the way, those NPS things that I talked about, they're super valuable. They're anonymous. I never would have really believed that they were anonymous when I participated in them. I never would have said what I really thought. But now that I'm on the receiving end, they're truly anonymous. So feedback is important. I think I'm willing to deal with, people who have different approaches to their work, for sure. You want to work from home. You have responsibilities with your kids. You're a professional. Fit in those things to your daily work. And I think I would tolerate, it's not just tolerate, I think I would encourage people on the team to develop their own relationships. So, I don't look at myself as running a kindergarten or a preschool, and, we really don't. So my job is to create an environment where people can, all of the CI stuff in my view comes down to trust, where people can trust each other, where they can feel safe, they're not going to be attacked, and I think that's where sort of innovation plays in. People have to feel, if they feel comfortable offering up their own ideas, but also innovation is about setting goals and identifying challenges and all those things. So I'd probably be a little less involved in trying to help people solve interpersonal problems to the extent that you have to mediate disputes for one person all the time. I think you're probably like, yeah, that person's probably at fault. It honestly, for my team, doesn't come up that much right now. I think that, but we're looking for people that exhibit behaviors that are within an acceptable range. And within that range, I really want people to develop their own rapport. It's not for me to, I tell the group all the time, you guys own the culture. I'm like one person. Here's what I think. But you guys own the culture. If you guys are there for each other and support each other, you're going to have a good culture. If you're not doing that, then it's not going to be as good. And would I try to identify people who are breakers? Yeah, I would. I think it's hard, though, to see what those things are. You have to listen. You have to triangulate. You have to be engaged with what people are saying. I'd probably be a little less on the side of trying to help people solve their individual orientational work, because other than sort of, again, I want to make sure that people are developing and growing, like we're doing for a big group of people. We're doing executive coaching this year. Make those opportunities available to them. What they do with them, I think that's more up to them. Try to give direct feedback on a regular basis. I think one of the things that a lot of managers do, I'm certainly very guilty of it, is being non-confrontational. Yeah. Right? You just want to say the good things to people in terms of their performance. And not be willing to say things that are difficult to hear. And after a long time of doing it, I realized that is a much bigger sin. And then telling people things that you believe to be true. Unfortunately, the way the world works is there's going to be a handful of arbiters of the behaviors that we want. And so it's possible that I'm wrong, but I'm just telling you what I see. I think the worst thing is there's this idea that when someone shows up for their review, they should never be surprised about what they hear. And I think it's a little bit of a cliche, but the way that happens, I think, is if we're not confrontational about sort of feedback. Always want to be respectful of everyone in the way that you present that, and certainly present it in a way that's designed for people to take it on, and we'll provide them resources to try and work through challenges. But again, resources are limited. There's somebody that I think is, okay as a lawyer, and a challenge sort of from an EI standpoint. Do I want to spend my limited resource on that person, or do I want to spend it on the person that I think has a chance to not only be at the level above them, but at the level above that? My choice is going to be to spend the resource on the people that I think have the highest ceiling. So I'll give direct feedback, but the two pieces of it I think are address the true outliers, and then within the normal range, allow people to develop relationships between themselves and make them responsible and accountable for those relationships. And then we're people who are doing a good job of building those. I think it's people very quickly see what behaviors are rewarded and what behaviors are not. And so I prefer to approach it that way.
You brought up the concept of trust, which we haven't talked about too much, or at least expressly on the panel, and I think it's a really interesting one. Because I do think that obviously collaboration, rapport, empathy, compassion, all of those things build trust on a team. But I agree with you. I mean, I think you have to be honest with someone, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that comes to authenticity as well. And constructive criticism is important. But what do you do, and I guess this is sort of personal, but what do you do when trust has been broken on a team, right? Or what's an example of a time where you were on a team where trust was broken, either between you and another teammate, or maybe, the leader and the junior, and how do you repair that?
Time. I think you have to prove that, you're worthy of trust again if you're the one that broke it, or there's always a good reason, I would imagine, if I would think, I would hope that trust is broken, but who knows? But I think anything, any relationship, it's time. If you have to repair, you have to put the work in to repair a relationship that's been fractured in some way. I've seen it, I had two members of my team recently, I could see the trust was broken between them. They used to be great friends and stuff went south. They're still great professionals and they can work together, but that collaboration that they used to have isn't quite as easy. And so while I don't think it's my job to fix it, I do hope they do. Because I think when people don't get along, they avoid each other, just like that CFO and that tax person. And I think avoidance is bad for culture, because I see it all the time. You're like, I don't really want to deal with that person, so I'm just not gonna. I'll send them an email, or we'll go around them. And I think that breaks down sometimes your culture, and it breaks down kind of the communication, the efficiency, and how good your team can be. So while it's not my job to fix it for them, I do hope they do, because I think them working together makes us a better team than when they're isolated.
Can you or anyone that wants to say it think of a specific time where trust is broken with you, and what, in a professional environment, and what was done to repair it? What worked? What's the success story?
Honest contrition is, I think, essential. Saying I'm sorry is barely a start, but coming to the conversation, once you realize the trust is broken, coming to the conversation with a plan to repair it by the violator, I think is then something that helps, but it does take time. And it depends on what kind of trust. When you first said trust, my first thought was, I'm dealing with a situation now where a partner has told me I can't trust this associate's work, right? And so that's one thing. But then when you get to, and you can fix that because you just help the associate become a better lawyer. But the breach of an emotional trust is much bigger. My immediate response to that was, "You're dead to me," which I know is not the right answer, right? I'm sorry if I'm overly controversial, but that's not the way I said it in my immediate response. But I know better. But it takes a lot of work. But it's absolutely a two-way street. It's not just the person who has been harmed being willing to forgive and trust again. It's also the other person not just looking at the relationship as transactional and needing to be fixed in order to get through the day, but recognizing that they've done something wrong and wanting to look deeper in themselves to figure out how they can repair it. Because whatever it is, if you're a trust breaker, then you're not going to be as valued a member of the team, at least my team. So if your goal is just purely self-interest and you don't care about that, then you will weed yourself out and there won't be a place for you. But so fixing the broken trust requires consistent effort on the part of the violator.
These relationships that we have at work, they're super fragile. They're people who are sort of brought together because the same company hired both of them. And I think if we're lucky, we find people that we really connect to at work, but otherwise that connection can also can be relatively tenuous. So you got to do a lot of work on the front end to build foundations so that you can get through these things. And then, it's challenging. You may never be able to repair those things. And so it's hard though, but I do think that the work relationships are super tenuous just because of the nature of them. It's not people who are chose to be friends so it's super hard. That's why the foundation is so important. So that if you're saying that you care about these things, people have a reason to believe that you do care about them. You can't parachute in with trust. It doesn't work that way. In my experience, it doesn't work that way.
So I don't want to end it on a depressing note about trust breaking. And I know we're going to have an AI panel later, and that'll be interesting in a different way. The last sort of question I want to ask this panel is, obviously there's so much happening in the world of AI, and don't kill me, you guys. And that's a topic of conversation that everybody's just buzzing about all the time, and it's important, and we'll hear more about it later. But what does or how does the sort of super speed advent of AI or development of AI make EI or emotional intelligence even more pertinent on teams? And does it mean we all need to pay a little more attention to this as we move towards a more tech-heavier, AI-heavy world? And this is personal and professional. Most people I know are using AI personally as well. Not just at work, and I think different workplaces are sort of implementing at different speeds, but does this fast track of AI create a more pressing need to focus on the human aspect of work? Or maybe it's just a recenter, refocus on that aspect.
I think a lot of the things that we do that, whether you're an efficient worker, those AI hopefully will take some of those mundane kind of everyday tasks that aren't hard to have to get through. And so I think the tasks that are much more, thinking, working together, those tasks I don't think are going to go away. And so that emotional intelligence will just become much more important because, you have somebody who can I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm just speaking, punch out a contract for a real estate thing and you're great, you can do that, fill in the blanks.
Give me a form.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds like something that would happen, right? Yeah. I don't know. But it's about those complex issues of I don't know about this. We should confer, we should talk. And so as you sit down and talk to people, that's where I find a lot of the value comes from the complex issues, not the everyday things. So I think AI is just going to help streamline that and make that even more pertinent in our everyday lives.
I agree. I don't think it's just aspirational. I think it's necessary that we retain and maintain that human aspect and connection. I think we'll see that the companies, whether they're creating AI or not, whether they're using AI or not, those that are successful are still going to be staffed by human beings. And the success is not an algorithm. So you can find a lot of people, you can find a lot of videos that you like based upon the algorithm, but you can't build the connection and the trust without sitting down, looking somebody in the eye, talking to them, listening to them, and hearing their opinions.
I don't have any further questions for the panel, but if there's questions in the audience, Mr. Leggett.
You all spoke a lot about being a leader and leading and managing your people. How about managing up? How do you use emotional intelligence in that series of interactions?
Jamie with an amazing question for you as well. This is quintessential Jamie for all of those that you don't know Jamie. He's brilliant.
That's like manipulation, right?
It's essential. I think I know, and I make it my business to kind of know what is happening, what's important to my boss at the time, what's important to his boss. Like, because at the end of the day, and like our owner, that's what our strategy is for the whole business. And so if I don't know what's happening with him and his life or what's going on in the business and managing up to him, like my boss is in charge of Miami Open, which is happening soon. Everyone should go. And so he's going to be super busy. So anything I need, I'm trying to get ahead of him, in front of him this week, because he's going to be insanely busy coming up. And so I can't leave some of those stuff off. And like anything, managing up is so important. Because if I leave off some of those things I need, I'm not going to get to them. And he's going to be too busy. So like being emotionally aware of like what others around you need is like crucial. Like I feel like you can't progress up without that skill.
Yeah, anticipation. Exactly. That awareness and the anticipation. I mean, law firms are hierarchical. Even if it's a control group, there's still a group at the very top of the pyramid. And if you're in the middle of that, you need to have an awareness of what the goals of the organization are. If you're rowing in the direction of those goals, you're going to be more successful by anticipating what it's going to take to reach them. I always heard as an associate from like Colin and Knight, but not exactly, that your job is to make me look good, right? That was one of the mantras of some of the partners. And while it sounds cutthroat, my wife likes to say, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I try to use that a lot. I looked at that and I said, okay, I don't really care about making her look good, but I want to make sure that what I do is helping her accomplish the goals that will then be recognized and inure to my benefit and make me successful and ultimately make the firm successful or the case successful, whatever. So she really only wants to look good because she answers to somebody too, ultimately. So
Jimmy set it up nicely for me. I was thinking maybe we could go 360. So you talked about managing your direct reports, managing up. From a self-leadership perspective, or sort of in the spirit of leading by example, are there practices, and Jeff, you alluded to this a little bit with the note-taking, but are there practices, are there tools, are there people that you rely on to catch you if there's a gap in your own emotional intelligence?
That's a great question.
I mean, I think that's the hardest one, right? I mean, I think anybody that would say that they see themselves clearly, probably by definition, does it. We all have our own biases. Tools, those surveys that we do are super helpful. I mean, luckily my company did a lot of leadership surveys, so everybody that reports to me, they fill out a survey and I have to read the feedback, and I encourage people to be brutal. In my experience, 360 feedback, like going through those exercises, is crazy helpful. You're going to find out a lot of things about yourself that you probably don't want to read, but people are thinking it. And I think earlier in my career, I would have been like, let me just avoid hearing this. And some of it you're going to disregard and say, I don't think that's important. But others of it, you're going to take away the way people see you. I don't think there's any shortcut to that. It's really hard to get clear feedback on yourself. I think there are certain people that are perceptive enough to get that. I'm not on that list. And so when you get the feedback about yourself, you're like, oh my God, really? I wouldn't have thought this was an issue, but 39 other people do. So I guess I'm going to go with it. So I think that's the best thing that I've heard is I think 360 feedback's super valuable, and I have like the top 5 or 6 leaders on my team going to go through that process this year, get 360 feedback, and then get executive coaching to follow up to try and do it. And I've been the beneficiary of that in the past, and some of it sticks and some of it doesn't, but I think that's the best. For me, that's the best way.
For those of us that don't know what 360 feedback is, because I don't know what that is, what is it?
So corporate speak. 360 feedback would be so for me, it would be someone, a professional generally, will go interview people who, my supervisor, my direct report, and my peers. And so that would be the 360. Peers, supervisor, and direct reports. Brutal.
Every angle.
Brutal. It's never fun to read. But, and again, I think early in my career, that's the other one. I think that's the biggest. With some maturity, I think it's easier to sort of absorb that stuff and read it rather than sort of, I don't really want to know. Mm-hmm. So
I'm a fan of the 2x2 review process, which is a lot, sometimes more geared toward spot checking a specific project, but it takes a lot of trust. Mm-hmm. Where I ask the person, what do you think you did? One thing you did really well here. Talk about it, listen to it, hear about it. Okay, what's one thing you could have done better here? And then I'll give the same feedback. I think you did X really well. I think you could have improved on Y, and this is why. And then getting that same feedback back from the same person, whether it's on that project or not long after that on something else, but building the trust that way too. That the role is to get us both better at what we're doing in the relationship.
I love that. I think that's super helpful. Super, super helpful. Thanks for sharing.
Can I use that? I've never heard it before, but I like it a lot. All right.
Hi there, Peter Layton, and the question that I have is similar to what you were just getting at. Obviously, in corporate world, and real lawyer world, CPA world, which I'm in, there's a lot of egos, right? And so what we're really getting at here is to kind of get to the core of how we can help the teams grow and the individuals grow. The egos have to drop some from the higher ups, and we've got to allow that feedback that you're saying is brutal to read it and act. And I love the fact that you talked about the executive coaching situation for yourself. So, I came from higher education for 12 years. We had things like, instead of top down, we had horizontal opportunities. So safe spaces, advocates, things of that nature. And I think for too long, in trying to retain good employees, we need to think more horizontally to be able to collectively share, knowing clearly that the respect to the supervisor has to be there. Are there any thoughts on that? Do you see any trends that are going that way? Probably not much, but I'd love to hear if you have more on that.
I think some of the trends are going backwards. I don't want to beat up on millennials, but I think that yes, there has to be a level of respect in order to have your feedback accepted, especially when it's critical. But I think that one thing that I see in my own practice, but also when talking to clients, is a tendency toward folks who think they have mastered their craft way too early, and they're not open to feedback. And so they're going to have a tough road in whatever world they're in, I think, and unless they're really seriously good with being an entrepreneur, and maybe an entrepreneur with one employee themselves.
I guess it goes to what Llopis just said in a little different way. Currently, I think we're also dealing with the fact that COVID disrupted, I think we're still dealing with that ripple, and that COVID disrupted a lot of what we used to see in the business community and general community in terms of civility and practicality, and the sense that, the person was your neighbor or you were going to see them again. And that sort of broke down during COVID. And so I think the lack of civility, or the lack of people who practice civility, is a real problem in the workplace still. And how do you address that as you're trying to, as you say, be empathetic to people, but in some cases, these people seem to, you almost want to say, did your parents teach you? You walk in, how many people, I know this, laugh about it, but you walk into a bathroom and the toilet seat's up or the papers are on the floor, and you say to yourself, who taught these people how they were going to actually work in a professional role? I hope that was a good question.
Well, I'm developing a reputation for office-wide emails where I remind people that the maid has the day off, and the dirty dishes in the kitchen aren't going to clean themselves. And that's my thought exactly, is who are you? But maybe their mother didn't teach them that, right? So let's accept that, because this is what we're dealt with. And that's the other thing, is I can't have unreasonable expectations. I have to deal with the cards that I'm dealt. And that's part of my job, is not just to scold, but to help people if they don't have that skill already, to rinse a dish and put it in the dishwasher.
I just want to say that I appreciate we're even having this conversation, especially in this capacity in terms of like a business forum. Being emotional was something that we weren't supposed to bring to our business place. I think now more than ever, whether it was because of COVID or because of different generations or different approaches, we need to be connected. We need each other. And so I appreciate that we're even having this conversation, and especially here.
Thank you.
For more information on this show and other resources, visit bastamron.com and connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Bast Amron.